Okay, so everybody, I am so excited to introduce you to Debbie. Debbie is an author, a cartoonist, an artist based in Brooklyn. And not only is she the author of Next Stop, a middle grade graphic novel that just came out, but she also is the proprietor of a very cool store called Pomo Press. I'm also going to put the URL for that in the chat. Everybody should check that out. So, Debbie, today and during the interview, I'll ask you about both your book creation stuff and also your online art stuff. And so I think for starting off the interview, what would make the most sense would be for you to just start off with the book, Next Stop, and tell us about what is it about?
Sure. Okay, so Next Stop is a middle grade graphic novel about a girl named Pia who is on this sightseeing bus tour road trip through the desert. And you come to learn that the last stop on the tour is this underground lake that is like rumored to have some kind of mystical properties. Like some people say they see visions in the water, some people say drinking the water can heal you from illnesses. So you learn that everybody who's on the tour is trying to go to this lake for their own reasons. And Pia also has her own reason, which she keeps very secret throughout. And she's on this tour alone without her parents. So as she's going through, she's making relationships and connections with the people who are there, who are very kind to her, and she makes a really good friend with the other teenager who's on the tour. And through flashbacks that show like the year of Pia's life leading up to this present day tour, you come to find out that a year ago, her family had a tragic event where they lost her younger brother, and Pia is like trying to, she's hoping secretly that the lake can bring her brother back. So it's a road trip journey and like an emotional journey at the same time. And yeah.
Can you say a little bit about the magical realism aspect of it? Because there was something you talked about in your book lunch last week about how as the bus tour progresses and they get closer and closer to the lake, sort
Mhm.
of stranger and stranger things start happening.
Yeah, so like there's like that kind of feeling of it's becoming dreamier as the story progresses and things start to become surreal. I thought that it would be like a cool reason for that to happen, like in terms of the landscape starts changing as the bus gets closer and closer to this destination, which is could potentially be explained by the fact that they're like physically getting closer to this geological phenomenon. So maybe like the lake water is actually changing things in the environment, but it also gives this like dreamy feel to the story, like you're not sure what's real or not. And I kind of really like to that like going down the rabbit hole feeling.
Okay, so I'm so excited to talk to you about both your writing process, but also your art process, because I think they're both fascinating. Let's start with the writing. So, can you pinpoint the germination of this book idea? Like, when did you first get the inkling of it, and how long did it take you to really flesh the whole thing out?
Um, so for me, I tend to start with the idea for a place. So I kind of like just let ideas percolate for a really long time in my head. So for like a couple of years, I was thinking about the desert, and I was like, I want to write a story that's like in this like dry heat, and like I never really had been out to the American West before. And I was like thinking about it already. So in 2018, I did this cross country road trip with my partner, and like saw these cool landscapes in like Utah, and we went to the desert in Arizona, and we went to Joshua Tree, and like this I was already thinking about writing a story about the desert at that point, and it was like really good fodder for like all the road trip stuff that was in it. But I didn't really have the impetus to make like actually write anything down until I met Janna, and she was like, do you have any ideas for graphic novels? Let's talk about it. And then that was like, I have a deadline. Okay, like I need to actually figure out like what the story is about. And so I had the setting at that point. I wanted it to be a road trip. And then it took a little bit more time to figure out like who is the character and like what is the emotional journey. Because I also knew that I wanted to have it be like a story that could incite an emotional response, hopefully, in a reader, because those are the types of stories that I loved the most when I was like that age, and I still do.
Mhm.
So I really want to try to like figure out, okay, like, I want to make you really care about this character and then like have a catharsis at the end for her.
I think your manuscript is the only manuscript that I've read so far in a draft stage that did make me start sobbing.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
was like a huge boost for me when you said.
So, you might remember better than me, Debbie. I don't remember exactly because I met you in, I think, the fall of 2019.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I don't remember how long it took you from that time until you had like a pitch that was fully ready to go out to publishers. Do you remember how long that took?
Um, Vaguely, I'm pretty sure I had the outline of the story by like January of the next year. And then um I think I remember we talked about how to put together a pitch, and because I'm a debut author, you thought it was a good idea to like script the whole thing out, the whole book.
Mhm.
So I remember I did that really quickly, like in I was like 2 weeks, I'll like write the whole thing. And I did. And then the next step was to do the sample pages, which took much longer because, well, I did like a couple pages, and then it was like March 2020 and things were like really messed up,
Yeah.
especially in New York. So I lost like a month or two. I remember we actually went on submission in June. So
Mhm.
I did 20 finished pages for the pitch, and that took a while.
Yeah, yeah, but you are still very fast, I have to say.
Thanks.
Especially writing the whole script in 2 weeks. How, like, were you working on it from 9 to 5 or so? Or how can you just like, give us some
uh,
details?
I think so. I was like, I remember I we were talking and you're like, okay, how long do you think it'll take? And I was like, 2 weeks, and you were kind of like shocked. And I was like, oh, is that fast? Oh, then I'm not sure, but I'll try. So I thought it was like fun to have this goal to finish it.
Mhm.
And I was definitely like writing most of every day during the time. Yeah.
Okay, so we at the end during the Q&A, there might be more questions about the writing process, but I want to shift into your art process now. So I think you said that you're a self-taught artist. Is that right?
Mhm.
So can you say a little bit about how you developed your art, your illustration? Well, I guess a little bit about how you developed your style, and then also how you developed a career as an artist.
Yeah, so I went to school for graphic design, but while I was doing that, I like discovered I really liked illustration and I like to make these like little scribbly drawings. And so I was always kind of thinking that it would be really fun to be an illustrator someday. Um, so I graduated school and started working as a graphic designer in New York, and then on the side, like at night nights and weekends, I would do illustration stuff. I started going to like zine festivals and indie comic festivals. And from there, I was like, oh, I want to like make stuff and sell it. So it was like really fun for me to like make different products. I started trying out like fun things. Like I would compile my drawings into zines to sell, but also I made stuff like patches and charms. I made like trading card decks. I made a tarot deck, like a lot of random stuff during that time when I was like fully employed. So I could just, it wasn't like my income depended on it.
Mhm.
Um, but the thing was that I never really drew people at all because like I just hated drawing people because they didn't come out the way I wanted it to. And it was like, I have a very low frustration tolerance. So I'm not a person who like sketches a lot and like does studies and to improve. Like I'm just
Mhm.
so bad at that. So I got really lucky. And at the end of 2018, I got offered the job to illustrate this kid's book, which is a nonfiction guidebook with different topics about like life skills. And so it involved drawing a lot of kids in it. And at that point, like I got the offer to do it. And like I was like, why was I asking to do this? Like nothing in my portfolio has any people in it at all. But I was like, well, if I it's 160 pages and if I do this job, I'll probably get better at drawing children. So I that's what happened, thankfully. And then I got to do like the sequel as well. And you can even tell, like looking between the two books, that I improved a lot. So um I don't know how to answer like how I like was self-taught, I really only drew things that I like really inspired me that I wanted to draw. I think that, I mean, that does help because if you're motivated to make art and you're putting it out there a lot, like people do like find you through that. And that's what happened with this first book project. Was like someone at a festival was an art director for a publisher, and she
Mhm.
picked up my business card. And I don't know why she like thought that I would be a good fit, but I wasn't gonna say no. I thought it was a good
Mhm.
opportunity to push myself. um and so that's how I kind of like got into publishing originally. And I forget, what was the did I answer the question?
Oh, well, yeah, you did. You did. You totally did. And I guess I should also say that that's how we met too, because I met you at Anime New York City, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Just look at Artist Alley, walking
Yeah.
along. Yeah.
That year, well, yeah, so I to go back to like my career stuff trajectory, I worked as a graphic designer for 6 years after college in New York. And in the beginning of 2018, my office shut down, so they let everyone go. And I was like, this is my opportunity to just try to do illustration like freelance for this 1 year. So
Mhm.
that year I signed up for like every festival that I could. Thankfully, I had some savings and stuff, so I was able to do it. And at the end of that year, I was at MICE, which is a convention in Boston, and that's where I met that art director and I got to do this first book.
Mhm.
And so it really was like putting myself out there, like did get result in opportunities.
That's so cool. So, okay, you said that phrase, putting yourself out there, that I like to talk about a lot. Um, so you talked about how you did lots of festivals. Do you feel like your social media also has resulted in substantive things for you, or do you feel like it's more just supplementing what you do in real life?
I definitely like online sales all come from social media for my shop. And that's like, it's a small but significant portion of my income now, is that. I would say that was really helpful in like 2020 and 2021. I did a really well online that year. People were a lot more like
Mhm.
online and like wanting to shop online. But it's hard to say how much exactly like social
Mhm.
media translates into. It's like up and down.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. I'm looking at my questions for a minute. Oh yeah, I definitely wanted to ask you about risograph printing because
Mm,
you are a really big fan of Rizzo printing, right?
yeah.
I think there might be some people on this Zoom who don't know anything about Rizzo printing. So can you explain what it is and why you enjoy it so much?
Yeah, sure. So like you could see like that's an example. That's not one of my prints. It's Red McDonald, but
Mhm.
a lot of prints you see now at festivals are Riso prints. So risograph is it's the name of this industrial like copier like machine that was made for office purposes originally. but the way that it prints colors is that it has these drums inside the machine that will burn a stencil of what you're printing onto the drum. And then as the paper goes through, it presses the ink through that stencil onto the paper. So the result is like kind of like a screen print like look. And um, also it's like screen print where you're like layering the colors one by one onto each other. And so sometimes you get like slight misaligned registration and all this result, it just makes it feel more like it's handmade, even though it's actually shooting through this printer. And in the last like 10 years, artists have really discovered that this is a like compared to screen printing, very cheap method of producing prints that have this look and feel that's similar to screen printing. And they have like very fun like fluorescent colors, and you play with like the layering of it, you can get like really nice results. And so I think it's just gotten really, really popular. Yeah.
So is Riso printing something that's been around for a super long time?
I think it's been around, yeah, like 30 years, like at least 30, like, well, I'm
Mhm.
saying 30, but it's probably longer. I'm thinking like 1980s or something. I
Mhm.
think.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
It's a it's the name of the Japanese company, Riso, that made
Oh,
the
okay.
machines originally. Yeah.
Got it.
Like they made it as a cheap way to produce like color flyers and stuff like that.
Okay. So with your online shop, are the Riso prints the thing that you sell the most, or is it something else? Oh, and also, can you talk a little bit about your Kickstarters for your journals and cookbook and things like that?
Yeah, sure. So in my shop, yeah, I talked a lot about when I was starting out, I made all types of different products, merch, and I just played around with making things that I thought were really fun. Um, and ultimately it was like a learning process. A lot of the things that I made early on like did not make me much profit at all. But eventually I learned that the Riso prints, I started doing Riso prints that are fan art inspired. So I'll take like I like to take mashups of characters from different kind of like shows and media that I like, put them together in like funny scenes with like some kind of quirky idea that's the basis of it. And people really like those because they recognize the characters and they like will think it's a funny premise. And so those prints, have like awesome margins because I started out selling them for 15, now they're $20 each. And they cost like $1 to make, and they are easy to ship because I can fit it in a letter rigid mailer. Um, and so that when I started doing the Riso prints in like 2019, it was like I unlocked the next level, I feel like, to my shop and like selling at conventions. Because when like at conventions, even if it's like a comic focused show, you'll find that prints will always make you the most money because the margins are so big, where like selling books and zines is like it's 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 awesome, but like you're not going to make as much. So
Mhm.
it helps to make the table feedback and make a little bit extra if you're also doing something like prints.
Mhm.
And for the Kickstarter stuff, I have been kickstarting projects. I think I have done 6 or 7 since 2015-ish. Um, Honestly, I first learned about like the how Kickstarter really works when I was back at my design job. I helped my company um, launch and run one, and as part of that, like we learned a lot about like the inner workings of Kickstarter and like a lot of like the metric stuff that is important to know when you're launching a project, like what makes it successful, like what kind of milestones you're like looking to hit.
Mhm.
And then I looked at a lot of Kickstarters at that time and learned about how, like, what makes a page really attractive to someone to back it.
Mhm.
So I started out doing, like, I kickstarted a zine, like, I think the goal was like a couple $100, it was like my
Mhm.
first thing. And now I've done some bigger projects. Like, I've been selling stationery in my shop. So Like something I've kickstarted a few years ago is like a planner. Um, it's like
Mm-hmm.
a undated weekly planner, and that stuff does really well on Kickstarter. And with every project that I do, I find like uh, Kickstarter helps to generate a lot of new fans who come over and will end up following me to the next project and the next, and sometimes they'll sign up for my mailing list. And it's a
Mm-hmm.
nice way to, it's as if it's another social media platform where there's an audience there, and sometimes you can get like
Mm-hmm.
grow a little bit by putting a project on Kickstarter.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Be thinking about your questions. And if you have a question that you want to ask Debbie, maybe you can use the raise hand feature because then I know who to call on. So one question that we haven't talked about, Debbie, that I sent you was about your roller coaster journey with your publisher. I don't know if you want to talk how much you want to talk about that, but I mean, definitely, I think anybody who gets signed up by traditional publishing or even self-publishing, there's so many things you don't expect that happen and surprises and like left turns and things like that. And so tell me a little bit about whatever you feel comfortable sharing and like how you deal with that, up and down and up and down.
Yeah, so next stop is from Random House Graphic. Uh and like the between okay, between Next Stop and the book that I'm working on now, I've had three editors leave the publishing house while they were working on my book. So I basically have abandonment issues now because of this. But like what I've learned is that when you're working on a graphic novel, it's usually like such a long period of time. Like when I signed the contract in 2020 for this book, I was going to work on it for 2 years and then it was going to come out 1 year after that. So it's like a 3 year process. And a lot of things change. It can change in 3 years at a publishing house. So I had my acquiring editor leave, which really shook things up there because she was also the head of Random House Graphic. Um, and then so I got switched to a different editor. Like that was fine. It didn't really affect my progress working on the book because it was like after we edited the script of it, I was just kind of like head down doing the drawing for a year and a half. And they didn't really have that much that any really notes for me once I started turning in thumbnails, pencils, inks. Um, but then I turned in my book. My book was due in August 2022. It was supposed to come out the next fall, so 2023. August came around, I finished on time, I turned my book in, and then I found out that through a mix-up at the publisher, like through the editor changes, that internally they had pushed my book a year. It was in their system, it said it was supposed to come out fall 2024. So that was like the biggest like depleting feeling of being like, I finished it, it's coming out next year. And they're like, no, it's not. um my new editor was able to push that up a season. So it ended up coming out this spring. So in the end, it was like one season delayed, which is not the worst thing. And I've heard of this happening to other people too. Like there were a lot of like delays because of supply chain stuff during those years. And I heard that they did have to push a lot of books on the list during that time. But yeah, there was just no communication was like the big thing.
Mhm.
And I feel like what I'm learning is that yeah, like you and your agent like have to push them so much because they're not really like thinking about you like the author,
Mhm.
and like they're not going to hold your hand through the process, and you kind of have to like learn to like this is to try to like fight for the things you want out of it, and just like you got to fight for your own interests. And like honestly, without Janna as an awesome agent, like it's it's very good to have at least one person who's always on your side. So that's very helpful.
Yeah. Although judging from your book launch, Debbie, I feel like you must know every comics creator in Brooklyn because they all came to your book launch.
Well, I don't know. You're just like talking about your book for 3 years, and I guess people are like, okay, it's finally coming out.
Yeah. Woohoo. Yeah. Okay, so I did see that Tim has a question about Rezo Prince. Tim, can you unmute yourself?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi. Well, first of
Hi.
all, those Rizzo prints really are fun. I really like them and all, but I'm just confused. Those are copyrighted characters and everything, and I've seen the same thing with Mike Mayhack. I love his fan art of all that stuff, and but I just wonder, it's copyrighted characters. How is this legal? And because I think I'd be doing it too, but I'm just concerned about legalities and all.
Well, I mean, obviously, fan art is a big category of that like exists in this gray area. It's like you can, unless you're making a lot of money, doing something like this, it's really unlikely that anyone is going to be concerned. Like, but if a company like Nintendo's like contacts me to stop selling a print that has a character in it from that they own, then I'll just stop selling it, you know? Like it's not really like if you're not commercially large and it's not an instance of like I'm taking a piece of copyrighted artwork, like making a tweak and then printing it myself and selling it. Like I think that's a much bigger issue with doing that in terms of like the perception of it. When you're taking characters and ideas and doing something from scratch that's your own spin on it, people the audience views that like much more favorably. And like yeah, there's definitely, I'm not gonna say that I would win a legal battle against any like a company that where I drew their character in one of my prints, but you know, it's just like they're just cheap prints, and I make it's not a big deal if I stop selling one. It hasn't been an issue.
Okay, well, thank you.
All right. Does anybody else have a question? You guys all turned off your video, I guess because we're spotlighted, Debbie. Oh, Julie, did you raise your hand?
Yes. So I have a question about Debbie's process of writing the script, especially how it was finished in 2 weeks. Like currently, I am also working on my longer synopsis for my fantasy, and I am just wondering, like sometimes, like brains, like depending on the way that you think, sometimes the ideas can span very widely, and it's hard to actually find like or it will actually require some time to find like a logical progression of things. So I'm just wondering like what was your process of doing this in under 2 weeks? Were you like just like pens it all out and then start to work the details, or you have thought about this for a long time and the 2 weeks were actually putting your thoughts into paper?
Yeah, so the 2 weeks was after I had an outline already for the whole story. So that was 2 weeks of writing the actual page by page script where I would just in a text document, it was like page one, this happens, page two, this happens. And like so definitely the outline and figuring out the story beats took longer. I don't remember exactly how long. But I was saying this at my book launch too, where like I think that I was lucky that I picked a road trip story like this for my first book that I wrote, because like it kind of had this built-in like framework of okay, well like every big scene is they're stopping at a different roadside attraction, and I know that like the last big scene and the climax is they're at the lake. So it was kind of easy for me to just like see it all laid out like that because it's just physical journey, and then I could slot in like extra things like in between those roadside attractions. So I honestly think that I just like lucked out in that way for my first story. Like the things I've written since then have not been like as clear cut in terms of how do I narratively structure this thing. The 2 weeks was kind of like, okay, I have an outline, I know I just have to bang out the scenes and write down, like, even if it's a bad first draft, just need to write like, just a very rough version of what needs to happen in each scene, which I already knew in my outline.
Mm-hmm. Julie, does that
Very
answer your
much.
question?
Oh, what?
Julie, does that answer your question?
Yes, that answers very well. Thank you.
Awesome. Edna, I think you had your hand raised. Oh,
Hi.
actually, a lot
There's
bunch of
other
people
two
did.
people.
Sorry, yeah, I couldn't see it. I guess because of my screen. So first Josh, then Dell, and then Edna.
Sorry, Edna. Hey, hi, Debbie.
Hi.
I've got a two-part question. One, have you been able to make the transition to where you're doing art full time, or do you still have a day job? And two, um, how much of your shop are you fulfilling yourself, and how much of it is like things like perhaps t-shirts where it's like a fulfillment center?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I am really lucky that so far I am able to continue to get um ongoing book projects that let me do it full time now. So I have um right now I'm working on an early reader graphic novel series for Chronicle Books. That's supposed to come out next year. And I have another anthology project that I got hired to illustrate. So as long as I can keep managing to just get enough projects aligned, then I can keep being full-time freelance, which I'm very like I love the the routine of it and like the lifestyle. So I'm very lucky. And for my shop, yeah, I just last year started incorporating like the t-shirts. I don't fulfill those myself. That's something that if you buy it through my shop, it goes to a print on demand company that prints and fulfills those orders for me. But everything else there is stuff that I will personally pack and ship to you. And then yeah, and I also do festivals with all the stuff that's on my shop.
Did that answer your question, Josh?
Yeah, that was great. Thanks, Debbie.
Yep.
I feel like I had a follow-up to Josh's question, but it went out of my head. So Dell, why don't you ask your question?
Hi, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool. So thanks for coming to see us. I am currently working on a like a young reader's middle grade-ish script, and the only way that I have found to keep my doubt at bay is to work really quickly. So I'm trying to like bang this out in like a month. Um, how do you encounter these issues with doubt? Do you like how do you deal with them? Because like I get stuck when I'm writing an outline and I just spin my wheels. But I know for myself having a timeline helps, but I was wondering how you might handle it.
Yeah, definitely early on, it's the most helpful thing is to have like people you trust that you can get feedback from. So
Mhm.
for me, like I sent it to Janna, I like sent it to a few close friends, and it was nice to get like affirming feedback that what things were working and just like hang on to that little bit of like, okay, maybe I can do this. But it is definitely um I've struggled with that like throughout the process of drawing my book. You're like, I wrote this story, and like if it turns out that the story is bad, I will have basically spent 2 years drawing a bad story. You're just never really gonna know like until it's you have to just like keep pushing through.
Mhm.
But one thing that helped me early on when I was like even just considering the idea of can I can I write a graphic novel, is like going to the bookstore and looking at like not the stuff that I really love, but finding examples of books where I'm like, I think that I could like do better, like there's so much gets published and a lot of it is not very good. And if you can find an example of a book where you're like, I could do a better job than this, then that means like you could be published, there's no reason why you can't. So like that kind of helped me.
Yeah, that was really helpful. Sometimes I do the same thing and it feels so like narcissistic. But I'm just like,
You
it's
have
like
to
I
be.
have my own ideas, my own taste. Like I'm good on the drawing side. It's the writing side that I struggle with. But yeah, yeah, thank you. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Oh, Della, if it is helpful, I'll say I think you're an amazing storyteller.
Oh, shucks, that really means a lot. Thank you.
Okay, Edna.
Hi, thanks a lot for sharing with us today. And I have a couple questions. I don't recall you telling us exactly, your art process. Would you mind sharing that? Like what is it that you really love about, making graphic novels in the art process? And then I know I'm gonna just like try to tag in one more question. What's the best piece of advice anybody's told you that you use as a creator?
Okay, so my process is completely digital. So I do thumbnails, pencils and inks and colors all on my iPad, and I use Clip Studio for almost all of it. Um, I feel like, yeah, I touched on it before how I like don't like to draw people, and so my favorite parts to draw in my book were like the different roadside attractions, like fun, wacky stuff. And I think that kind of goes into the advice question because someone told me before that like when you are trying to think about a story that you're going to draw, that you should make a list of like your top favorite things in the world to draw and just put as many of those in your story as possible. Um, because it's just going to make a huge difference if you're actually excited to do the art. I really don't think I'll ever do a story that's just like straight up contemporary and takes place in school and at home. Like I have very little interest in drawing those backgrounds, and I feel like if you're going to do a graphic novel, there should be a reason why you're using a visual medium to tell a story. And so, I just think it's like a good opportunity to like put in like fun things that would be really hard to shoot as a movie and like would be not as fun to just describe with words. So I think it's like a good reason why a story should be a graphic novel if it has those elements. And yeah, it should definitely you gotta like do everything you can to set yourself up for success in terms of how you're gonna get through the drawing process, which is so tedious. And by putting in like things that you genuinely think are super fun to draw, it will be really helpful in doing that.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
So actually, Debbie, I have a question about the book you're working on now, because you're working on an early reader, which is quite different than because I would say that Next Stop is almost like upper middle grade.
Yeah.
So how has the writing process been different for you?
Yeah, so I actually wrote, so the series is called The Faraway Forest, and it's a series that takes place in this magical woodland full of like quirky anthropomorphic animal characters, and each book will follow a different character in the village and like show you a little bit of their life, and it's just mostly wholesome and like simple and sweet. And I wrote the idea for it like right after I finished the pitch for Next Stop, because Next Stop is this more like emotional, kind of a little bit intense story. And after I did that, I'm like, I just want like very simple, sweet, like cute thing to like soothe myself. So I wrote this idea, and I'm glad I get to work on it now because it's so different. It's like the first book is about Wally, who is a raccoon mailman, and he goes around and delivers mail throughout the forest. And it's truly just like when I work on it, I'm like laughing to myself all the time because it's just like goofy and silly, and it is like giving me the experience that I hope that the readers will have also. And because there's no humans in it, I'm like really enjoying drawing it. And it's much easier. Yeah, it was much easier to write and to draw, because it's about like 70 pages long, the story, and it's just like simple.
Is there a sort of structural element to the story that you have that has kind of emerged the same way that you said there was this structure of the road trip?
Um, a little bit in that the story kind of follows his mail route like throughout. So you kind of meet like the different neighbors through following him delivering their mail and stuff. But no, it didn't have um I broke this story up into 4 chapters kind of, and I felt like it was like chapter 1 introduction, chapter 2 like seeing deeper into the world, chapter 3 is like a problem that happens, and chapter 4 is a resolution. And I don't know, for a younger kid story that seemed to make sense for me. I don't know where I got that really, but just from like consuming stories that are
Mhm.
like more simple.
What are some of your favorite early reader stories?
um well, I kind of maybe am basing this more on like kids like TV shows or episodes
Mhm.
of TV. Um I really see it as like an animated show in my head. Uh but kind of in a way, this is older than the age group, but like I picture for the series starting out with very simple like stories and then being able to work in more complexity as if I'm allowed to do additional books past the first two. Kind of like Steven Universe, how like it starts out, it's like so it seems like it's just about this one simple thing, but you build a whole world and then like really impact can have an impactful storyline at the end. That's my dream with
Mm.
to do with the project if I can, if they let me.
Oh, wow. That is really cool. Okay, does anybody else have a question for Debbie? Maggie Shang?
Hello. Thank you for being here so much. I was actually, because you were saying you go to cons and you go to cons like mice, and I was wondering what services you use to like print all your zines and your products, because that's a lot of copies and that's a lot of product to move. So I was wondering if you'd be willing to talk a bit about your process for that.
Yeah, so it still have many different kinds of production uh, processes. So for my risograph prints, I used to actually print them myself, which was the absolute cheapest way to do it here. But during the pandemic, I couldn't go to the studio anymore, so I started outsourcing those. It's still like relatively cheap. I use a studio called Resolve. They're in Pennsylvania for my risograph printing. And then for mini comics and zines, I do a combination of either printing them myself at home, because I have a pretty decent printer, and binding them. And sometimes I'll just do a short run for a festival where I'm like, okay, I'll just make 30, which will probably be enough for this one festival. Or I'll use Mixum, which is a digital online printer. They're like really affordable and they do really decent work in both like glossy and uncoated prints. And it's pretty cheap too for short runs of booklets. Um, And yeah, I've used Zap Creatives also for things like charms and sticker sheets and stuff.
Oh, I'm writing that down. Maggie, did that answer your question?
Absolutely. Thank you.
I think I saw Kate had her hand up. Kate, Rahil, did you have your hand up?
I'm so sorry. That was an accident.
Okay.
Thank you, though.
Okay. So do we have one more question or we're gonna wrap it up? I'm gonna have one more uncomfortable silence while I wait to see if anybody else has a question. Oh, sorry, Debbie. I did remember my question. Remember when Josh asked a question and then I was like, I had a question, but I forgot. My question was, you mentioned that you have t-shirts that you fulfill through a different, well, you fulfill for most of the stationery and other items that you sell through your online shop, but through t-shirts or through something else. And I really like your shop, your online shop, because it's very clean and well designed. And I'm just wondering about the checkout process. So like if somebody were to buy a print and then a t-shirt from you, would they have to go through two checkouts separately or not?
No, because the company I use for that, there's multiple, but I use Printful,
Mhm.
and they specialize in this situation where you have a storefront yourself and certain items that you add that you want to link to Printful, like they will get the order for those items when someone checks out and they'll fulfill, but you don't have to check out separately. So it is like a little bit tricky where I have to add a little bit extra shipping if you're going to order a shirt and something else that's going to ship separately. Um, but it works pretty seamlessly, so that's nice.
Oh, that is really good to know. Okay, so I'm gonna wrap it up, and I would love it if Debbie, if you could say where you want people to connect with you online.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm on Instagram as Debbie Fong Draws. Um, the same handle on Twitter also. And I also have an account under Pomo Press on Instagram. And if you wanted to to join my mailing list, there's a link for that on my website, debbiefong.com.
Okay, debbiefong.com. I'm gonna remove our spotlight, and I would really like it if people could turn on their screen to say thank you to Debbie for joining us tonight. This was really great. If you can unmute yourself.
Thanks,
to say
Debbie.
goodnight.
Thank you,
Debbie.
guys.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very
Good.
much.
Thank you,
Everybody.
Debbie.
Bye. Bye.
Good
Yay.
night.
Thanks.
Bye.
Go buy Next Stop or,
Bye.
get it from your library, but read the book. Okay, thanks everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.